Hello and welcome to Greatest Games Never Played, a Lantern Light Studios production. I'm Alex Fitzsimmons and joined as always by my co-host Reno Del Maro.
What up, bitch?
Good to hear from you, Reno. We're going to be doing what we always do around this time. We're going to be taking a look at a pivotal moment in sports history and seeing what would have happened had it gone a different way. So without much further ado, we're going to send it over to our mythical mascot, Taro Sugimoto, to give us our topic for the week. Take it away, Taro.
The 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, would set up an unlikely David and Goliath matchup played out against the backdrop of the Cold War. The strained relationship between the host country and the Soviet Union had been escalating towards the possibility of all-out nuclear war, and set amongst the highest of stakes, a hockey game would capture the imagination of the world. The Soviet Union had sought to show a facet of its dominance through sport, and they had proven to be successful on every court they took to. But none dominated the world's sports scene like the Soviet ice hockey program. Meanwhile, the US was fielding a bunch of college kids who had no realistic expectations of even medaling. But when the two would finally meet in a medal-deciding elimination game, the world tuned in as the biggest of underdogs turned the Soviets' high-tempo play style right back at them. Famously called by Al Michaels with the timeless, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. The US had pulled off arguably the biggest upset in sports history, taking the gold, giving birth to a new collection of American heroes, and showing the world the Soviets could be beaten. This moment became a rallying cry in American patriotism and would fuel the future of the U.S. hockey program as it had now arrived into the public conscious all over the United States. But what if the underdogs had not prevailed? What if the U.S. team had fallen under the tread of the Red Machine like so many before them? How would the world have changed with so much resting on a hockey team? Do you believe in miracles? No.
All right, so there's our topic, Reno. I know this is one that I'm gonna like. I'm a big hockey fan. I love this kind of stuff.
Big
Um,
hockey fan you are, yes.
yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm leaning into this one. I know we don't get too many of these going, but I'm gonna love this one here. So, what would have happened had the 1980 U.S. team lost to the Soviets in that semifinal game there? I guess one of the big things we got to do here, and I think it's going to come with any kind of story that's dated back to the 1980s and so tied to geopolitics at the time. We almost have to talk a little bit about what led up to this, don't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, when you're talking about, do you believe in miracles? No. Oh boy. Yeah, we're going to I don't think it's just a simple answer because I think I mean, we can give a simple answer, and get right into it, but I think we got to let the story play out a little bit about what happened before we could get to what we think would have happened. So,
Okay.
yeah, I agree.
So what we know happened here, we know the Cold War. We're talking about U.S. versus Russia, or the Soviet Union, rather. Didn't mean to besmirch Russia here. It's the Soviet Union we're talking about. Um, Officially kicked off basically after World War II, when both these countries were looking at each other, and a lot of suspicion arose towards each other, and they started forming pacts to essentially set up defenses against each other. All sorts of crises and blockades and wars were fought from after World War II all the way up to the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. Shortly after that, there was a period of détente that ended when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in '79, which was heading right into the 1980 Olympics. So the 1980 Olympics kind of fell right in the middle of this giant scandal worldwide, where there was talk about the Soviets not even sending athletes there, about other countries pulling their athletes out if the Soviets went there. So the fact that this happened at all is a historical oddity, I guess. But that's kind of the way a lot of these politics were played out on sports courts this way. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, 1980 was an ideological win for the United States in the Cold War that had been waged with the Soviets. I mean, Cold War starts, what, 1947 after World War II.
Hmm.
Essentially, the Soviet Union, USSR disintegrates, breaks up in 1991. It's 44 years of, a lot of covert missions, a lot of, back and forth, a lot of, like spy shit going on, basically. I mean,
Yeah,
if you ever seen the show The Americans, I mean, it's incredible detail of what kind of stuff was happening right under our noses, you know what I mean, in the United States, abroad. And I mean, think about this. This might be crazy to say, but the US men's team winning, not just the gold medal, but beating, Soviet Union in particular, is up there with the race to the moon and the Berlin airlifts of 1948 and 49. I mean, so if the Soviets end up beating the United States in 1980, could this refuel the fire that was burning out in the Cold War against America?
and I
I
think you're
mean,
exactly right. Like you talk about psychological wins. I mean, like the you talked about the race to the moon, and I think this hockey game right here is kind of this in the same way. It played out as a measuring stick on each other. Who was better? Who was the who could assert dominance through sport? It was a real way that the Soviet Union approached a lot of their athletics during the Cold War too. Was they threw a lot of money at these things because they knew that this when they won games, they viewed that as them being better than the countries they beat, and that's not something that was lost on the United States or any other North American country at the time. Was that how important these games were viewed by them, and we had to take it as equally serious.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, think about this, Alex, too. A year earlier, a year previous in 79, Soviets invade Afghanistan,
mhm,
which the United States backed Afghanistan in that conflict. And Jimmy Carter, who was the president at the time, 79, early 80s, or early 1980, before Ronald Reagan actually was sworn in, was boycotted, the summer games that year in Moscow,
mhm.
and kept America withdrawn from that. So, I mean, if we lose to them in the Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York in 1980, if we lose to the Soviet Union, there's no chance of summer redemption. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? For us to come back on anything to try to get one back. But yeah, this is crazy because, like I said, you got to look at. I mean, we're looking at the socioeconomical times. I mean, the Soviet Union was disintegrating at that point, with the war in Afghanistan, with the invasion of Afghanistan, should I say? And there were severe economic problems that were plaguing the country, and Soviet influence on Eastern Europe was waning. And Reagan made it a huge point to fight communism on the political front. So the USSR was falling apart. I mean, could this victory have brought them back, made a given them a resurgence, a renewed energy? I mean, hell, does the Berlin Wall get more stone and mortar and more barbed wire added to it? While we're
yeah.
at it, does communism gain more strength after the US fails to pull the miracle off against the Soviets?
So you call it a miracle there, and I think that's obviously what we know it as, the miracle on ice. But in order to really get the scope of the miracle, you have to know how good this team was, how
Oh
good
yeah.
this Soviet team was. When you talk about sports dynasties, this might be the greatest sports dynasty in the world. They
Oh,
dominated
yeah.
in a way that is unbelievable when you look at these numbers. So after World War II, the Soviets wanted to start asserting their dominance in sports, and they were playing a game called bandy, which was basically soccer on ice. So decided they saw what was being played on the international stage was ice hockey, and they transitioned their professional they transitioned from bandy to ice hockey after World War II, and they began competing in they started fielding their first international team in '54. This team goes on between '54 leading up to the Olympics, winning 5 gold medals out of the 6 between then, going into 1980 in ice hockey. They They medaled in every world championship from the time they started in 54 up to 1980, including 13 goals in the 16 championships leading up to 1980. They were dominating. Was it the World Juniors as well? Like this team was. I mean, this is an unreal heading up to there. I mean, 5 of 6 gold Olympics. That's crazy.
Yeah.
We've never seen it since.
I love the history lesson. I love it. Coming up, I like it, man. You're like, I'm in the classroom right now with you. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, to understand how good they were. I mean, if you look at it across the board, I mean, if you even type like, and if you even go on the Google and type up, the Soviet Union national hockey team, you know what I mean, men's national hockey team. I mean, across the board, Bleacher Report, ESPN, ABC, all the major affiliates. I mean, it's almost renowned that they're probably, without a doubt, considered the greatest international team, let alone hockey team, but they're considered the most dominant international team of all time.
Yeah.
And to like get even further than that, you got to know, what the Russian Red Army, as they were called, really was all about. I mean, first of all, these guys were a union group of professional players. I mean, the
Well,
sport that they call amateur.
they weren't professional, but you're right. Were they professional in the way we probably know them today? I mean, it's hard to argue.
Well,
They
that's the
were
thing. There's speculation about it that because they were the CSKA Moscow, like they were a
a club team.
professional club team. I mean, there was a union group of players that had international experience since the 1960s, and they were like mislabeling these guys as soldiers and engineers and students in order to maintain their amateur status. So a lot of people speculate that they were not technically amateurs, but were able to, I guess, cook the books in a sense so that they could bring their most talented hockey players of a professional skill level to dominate the ice. I mean, 7 gold medals since 1956, 9 medals altogether until the Soviets, Union broke up in 1991. The only other country that has more medals is Canada. Canada has 15, with 9 of them being gold.
Yeah, and we look at before the Soviet Union started participating in the Olympics, Canada had won 6 of the 7 previous to that. So let you know that Canada was the world power. And then all of a sudden, this country is hiding behind the Iron Curtain, comes out and just dominates everyone in every aspect of it. It really is. They dominate the yearly world championships. They dominate the juniors. They dominate at the Olympics. They dominate in every way they could possibly dominate. And meanwhile, they're also being perceived by all of North America as the bad guy. And that scared everyone. I mean, especially Canada. They're over here running the NHL, saying they're the best people, the best hockey team in the world over there. And we talked about before about how they were amateurs. And the way I know they all had to all sign 25-year Army contracts when they joined the Soviet team. So they couldn't leave. They couldn't come over to the joint NHL teams. They couldn't defect. They weren't allowed to do any of these things. So they were just a mysterious team over there beating. And everyone said, "Oh, they're beating our amateurs. They're beating guys who aren't in the NHL. They're not beating the best." And then in 72, that all changed, because in 72, that's when we first see the NHL go up against these guys, and that was the Summit Series when Canada put their best forward against the Soviets in a best of 8, which to me still blows my mind. You had a best of 8 series, like you're asking for a tie, right?
Yeah.
Like we think of that now, It's like, what are they doing? But so they set up a best of 8 with Canada's best against the Soviets, and I know in the Soviet Union there was a lot of people saying this is crazy, like they're taking on the best in the world. What are they doing? And the NHL players felt that way too. And so the first 4 games were in Canada, and the USSR came in there and goes up 2, wins 2, loses 1, and ties 1. And then they go back to the Soviet Union, and Canada loses again. So they're down 3-1-1. And then, of course, we have our game 6, which is famous for the slash when Philadelphia Flyers legend and Canadian legend Bobby Clark broke Valery Kharlamov, their leading scorer's ankle, on a vicious slash, and kind of turned the tide of the rest of the series, where Canada was able to come back and win it 4-3-1 in the 8-game series. However, to say that this wasn't a coming out party for the Russians is an understatement.
Yeah. It's crazy because I mean the Soviets won 4 consecutive gold medals since 1964. I mean, their complete record of 27 1-1 in international play since 1964, and they had not lost a game since the 1968 Olympics. They outscored their opponents 175 to 44 in that 16-year time span. They had owned the US in that time span, outscoring them 28 to 7 in
Mhm.
international play. I mean, exhibition games against professional hockey teams in the 80s, Russia went 5-3-1, but in 1979 they routed the NHL All-Stars 6-0 to win the Challenge Cup. Um,
Well, the Challenge Cup was a 3-game series.
oh
Um,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
so the deciding game, the Soviets did rout the NHL
Yeah,
All
6-0,
Stars
that's right. In the
6-0.
finish.
Yeah, and that was heading right into the 1980 Olympics.
Which
Um,
they had an exhibition game against the US hockey team on, February 9th of '80, which was 2 weeks before the start of the Olympics, and they put a shellacking on the US team, 10-3.
mhm.
Actually, Soviet head coach, later was quoted saying that the victory turned out to be a very big problem because the Soviets essentially completely underestimated the United States.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, these, like you said, dude, the players are legendary too. Boris Mikhailov, Vladislav Tretiak, who was considered the best goalie in the world at the time and probably throughout the entire 70s, and Valery Karlamov, you know what I mean,
Mhm.
who was just probably the best player in the world considerably.
Yeah. Now, talking about Valery Karlamov again too. I know I mentioned before about what Bobby Clark did to him in Game 6 of the Summit Series there. Um, and of course that leads to Game 8, which by the way, it's a I kind of glossed over the Summit Series here because Game 8 is it's a tied game, and when Paul Henderson scores with 30 some seconds left to win the game there, um, that game was the most watched sporting event in Canada for for 4 decades. It wasn't until 2010, the Olympics gold medal game with Canada, that a game had more viewership in Canada than that 1972 Summit Series Game 8, which lets you know, as much as we go like, hockey's not that big here in the United States, it was a big deal. It was a big deal in Canada when the Soviets came over there to challenge the NHL, and they weren't done. This because after that they set up a bunch of exhibition games with NHL teams that really, I mean, if you look through the records, like they every year from 76, they sent them in 78, and they sent them through going forward all the way up to 90s, up to 90. And the Soviet club teams will come over and play NHL teams, and would basically just kind of dummy them. They would lose games here and there, but this was I mean, they clearly were showing that their league was superior to the NHL, that they were putting
Absolutely.
together better players, better teams.
Yeah, no doubt. But you know what? There's always that faithful, that faithful series of games in the NHL and the traveling series in 75 and 76.
Talking about
You
the
know,
Super
they
Series, that was the first round of the Super Series. You're right.
oh yeah. I mean, they were wiping people out. Then they got to the Canadians, and the Canadians tied them.
Hmm.
Prior to their final game, and of course, we all know the final game of that series would take place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, against the reigning Stanley Cup champion Flyers, and for
and
what would be a
and
crushing defeat to the hands of the Flyers.
for the record, what this really was too was this was a real look at the difference between North American hockey and what was coming out of the Soviet Union. Because the Soviet Union, we didn't really mention this before, but when they first came out, when they first launched their hockey program, they really didn't have a lot of tape to study. They weren't watching NHL games. They tasked this guy Anatoly Tarasov to build the team. They said, "Here, build the team." So he started reading books on hockey. He didn't know much about it. He played bandy, and he started building the Soviet style with no real influence from the way hockey was being played anywhere else in the world. And he created this weaving back and forth passing style. It was a high skill, knowing where your teammates are, finding open ice kind of style. Meanwhile, North America is playing this straight ahead, mean, tough, beat them on the boards, skate forward, hit them, hit your man. The player with the puck can carry it. Someone else is going to make room for him. These were very different styles of hockey, and it's really kind of unique because the Soviet style developed really in a vacuum around when they weren't seeing what someone else was doing. And you're right. And when you talk about the Philadelphia Flyers, they were the epitome of the North American style in
Oh,
1976. They were the
yeah.
Broad Street Bullies. Everyone knew that these guys were the black mark on the NHL. They're the black eye on the NHL. They were punching their way to a Stanley Cup, and
It's almost
doing
like a
it.
setup. You know?
I mean, this was the quintessential matchup of the two styles here, and again, I would like to say this too. This is not the Soviet national team they're sending over. It's the Red Army team, which is a club hockey team in Russia, which did contain a lot of members of that the national team. But it wasn't like they were sending their full national team. They were sending their club teams over to play the NHL teams. So, but you're right. You want to get into what happened in that game?
I mean, you probably have more detail than me, but I'll tell you this. It was basically skill and finesse, which, in today's game, speed and skill and finesse, will dominate that kind of bruising style of yesteryear. But in the mid 70s, man, the bullies, like you said, epitomized just beating people up. And on top of that, game planning, just good game planning. I mean, the Flyers handed their asses to him in a 4-1 defeat. Of course, the infamous Ed Van Imp body check when he just knocked the hell out of
I like
Karlamov.
Karlamov again. This guy got his slashed his
This
ankle
poor son of a
broken
bitch.
by Bobby Clark in the Summit Series, then shows up into Philly, and he had to be telling these guys, like, look, don't trust these guys. They're not up
Huh.
to any good.
Four
And
years later.
4 years later, he's getting run over by Bobby Clark's teammate. And you're right. And the referees didn't make a call. They thought it was a clean hit, but the Soviets disagreed.
They
And
protested. They
they
protested it. They left
protested.
the ice for a while in a delay,
They did. And
thinking that delay was going to help them. They did eventually return to the ice, and it did not help them. They
yeah.
just got their asses further handed to them in that game. I mean,
And
the Flyers beat
the
'em.
legend about it is, of course, the Flyers owner Ed Snyder coming into the locker room and telling him, "You don't play, you don't get paid."
Yeah,
Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that is definitely the legend that has come out of that
they
out of that
always
event.
deny it, but I
They do.
definitely smell a payoff job by. I think Ed Snyder knew, I'm going to pay these guys to come over, and I'm going to let my boys just
Yeah.
ransack them, just beat the shit out of them, and that's exactly what happened.
But
So these guys should never came back.
yeah. Now, when they saw that style of play, that was, and really, in all fairness, and we look back on that now, it does feel like barely hockey. Like the Philadelphia Flyers and some other teams that era, the Boston Bruins, were playing a game that was, it was a violent game. It really was. People swung their sticks. They fought bench clearing brawls all the time. It's not the way the game's played anymore. It's not to say physical hockey is not a way. You can't win that way today. I'm not saying that, but not the way that they played in the 70s. It was anarchy. That's when Time Magazine had their story on the cover, the War on Ice. So it was a well-known thing that 70s hockey was a dangerous place to walk into, and the Red Army was ill prepared for that. But you're right. Then after that, obviously they kept matching up with the NHL and never losing a series to the NHL the entire time they came down from 76 all the way to 90.
Yeah,
With their
it's
club
insane.
teams. So I mean that's an impressive thing. But yeah, 79 Challenge Cup. We talked about that. How the Soviets then came in and beat up the NHL All Stars, and that was the Soviet national team coming down. And that was definitely, I mean, and then that's leading into the Olympics. Like, and these U.S. kids, it's college kids. These aren't guys who play in the NHL. These are amateurs.
True, but you know what? To dive into this, I mean, we know about how dominant and how unbelievably skilled, the finesse, the speed, the mental aspect of the game that the Soviet Union, national team, like held over every and all opponents that they came, face to face with. But to look at this a little further, when you look at it in hindsight after the fact, like these kids, I mean, and they were all college players prior to the Olympics, and they were, they averaged 21 years of age. I mean, they were the 7th seed heading into the Olympics, but these guys were no slouches at all. I mean, they had 13 out of the 20 guys on the team played in the NHL. you know, and played some significant
After
time
the Olympics. Now,
after the Olympics. Yeah. So I
and I
mean,
would
these guys are skilled.
there was a little bit of a propping your resume up a little bit there too going on. Like after they win this game, like to be able to walk into an
Oh
NHL
yeah,
negotiation and go, I'm also that guy that won that gold. You probably remember that. Like I think there's some of that
undoubtedly,
going on.
undoubtedly. But you know what? Some of these guys had some real skill and had some
Some of
really
this,
good
yeah,
seasons.
some
I
of these guys
mean,
had real good careers, but there's a lot of guys that stepped in and played 10, 20, 30 games. So there's definitely a lot of guys like that. And this is, I mean, let's be honest, the United States college hockey was not a pipeline to the NHL at that
no.
time.
And Herb Brooks basically took a lot of kids that he had played on the Minnesota team, whether he coached them or not. I mean, he'd known a lot of these guys from the Golden Gophers program. I mean, they were the youngest team in Olympics and U.S. history. And you know, in the second game of 1980, a few games before they actually met up with Russia, they had another upset over the Czech team, a 7-3 win over
Hmm.
Czechoslovakia, you know, before they played the Soviets in the tourney. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it is a huge resume, you know, booster without a doubt. But I mean, some of these guys went on to have pretty good careers. I mean,
No, there were
Neil
for guys.
Broughton played 17 seasons. I mean,
Rod.
mostly as a North Star. You know,
You
Broughton.
know,
Oh
you know, I
yeah,
got,
sorry if I'm
you know,
pronouncing
I got
some
to
of their
correct
names
you
wrong.
there.
Hey, listen, if I'm pronouncing some of their names wrong, please do. You know what I mean? I was
I'll be
born in
there. I'll be there.
'82, but Neil Broughton. I mean, he had he netted a cup clincher for the Devils over Detroit in the '95 Stanley Cup. He played 17 seasons.
Yeah, first player
Um,
to have an NCAA championship, an NHL Stanley Cup, and a gold
and
medal.
yeah, insane. Dave Christian played 15 years in the NHL. He had 41 goals in '85 and '86 with the Capitals. Christoph played 5. Jim Craig played 30 NHL games,
Yeah,
fizzled out, but played with a couple teams. Janisak was a backup goalie, did even played in the NHL. But Ken Morrow is probably one of the most impressive resumes. 10 NHL seasons. 3 months after he won the gold, he
hmm
wins, you know, his first of 4 championships with the Islanders,
consecutively.
and yeah, consecutively. And he's now the team's director of pro scouting. So yeah, guys were pretty. You know, Mike
No, no,
Ramsey, I think, was a first round pick of the Sabres the following year and played 18 years in the league.
yeah, no,
Four-time NHL All Star.
there was definitely guys that came out and did stuff, but I mean,
You know,
compared to,
Ruzioni was the most famous probably because he scored the game winner against Russia, but
and
he
he was the
never,
captain.
yeah, and the captain, but he never went on to play
Yeah,
another hockey game again. You know,
no, and
after they
that's
won.
but all this being said, these guys don't stack up to the resumes of the or the track record that the Soviets had put together leading up to this. The Soviets have been as a team, and specifically this team had been dominant for. I mean, some of these guys were in their 30s. They've been playing together for a long time,
Oh yeah, at the time, no way.
they did not stack up. No one viewed this as a fair fight. I mean, if we're honest, what kind of expectations were there, really, even on the Team USA? I mean, I know all of America hopes. You hope you're going to beat the Soviets during it's the Cold War. You want it, but like really, it was low. I guess the question to you is this the greatest sports upset of all time?
Quite possibly, yes. I mean, undoubtedly, at least I think in American history. I
Yeah,
mean, when you look at it across the board, I mean, outside of Jesse Owens dominating the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, I would say the U.S. men's hockey win over the Soviets is probably was and is the face of the most iconic sports moments, not only of the decade in the 80s, but arguably in American sports history. I mean, if the United States loses, I mean, what moment in sports history takes over the decade? I mean, the
I mean,
catch? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean
you know,
the decade. I'm not even sure. I mean, you look about what takes over for American sports. Period. Like not even that decade.
historically,
Like I guess, are we waiting for the dream team to come along before we can feel good about ourselves?
oh, you would say either historically speaking, you're probably looking at the dream team. Maybe Kerry Strug. Remember when she busted her ankle, winning team gold over Russia in the
Yeah.
'96 Olympics? You know, in the Summer Olympics. The '99 Women's World Cup win over China,
Mm.
another communist country. I mean, they won it over, in a shootout, 5-4. I don't know, maybe Rulon Gardner. Remember Rulon Gardner beat Russian Alexander Karelin, who hadn't lost in like 13 years of international competition. He was considered the greatest wrestler of all time. And some nobody named Rulon Gardner comes along and beats him for gold in 2000 Olympics. I mean, yeah,
Now
this is
that
the
yeah,
quintessential.
yeah, and you're right, because here's the thing, like, about what you just said about, I don't know anything about this wrestler, and I think that was kind of the point of, the 1980s here. Most of America didn't really care about hockey, but here was this matchup was set up. The Americans were the giant underdogs, and this thing mattered more than a hockey game to them. It was about the politics. It was about the Cold War. It was about all these things. They put on this game, and
I mean, was America expected the medal at all in
no,
80?
they weren't.
Not
They
even
were
a
not.
bronze.
They
Yeah, not
weren't.
even a bronze. And they shocked the world.
They shocked the
They
world.
they shocked the world. And I mean, all eyes, you know what I mean,
So
were on
so
Lake Placid.
so what allowed them to pull it off? How they do it? Like, how does an upset like this happen?
Grit,
Grit.
determination. I mean, first of all, leadership. I mean, you got to give it to Herb Brooks. I
Mhm.
mean, he they always said that when you like read interviews about, these guys and stuff like that, they always say he would push you to the brink, push them, push them, push them. I know, like, he worked their cardio over like no other. I mean, those guys would be doing like 2, 3 a day workouts, to the wee hours of the morning. I mean, pushing their not only their physical body, but their mental psyche. But then he would just know, just right at the right moment to back off and let them breathe. And
Mm.
I think when you have leadership like that, I mean, it's like any great coach. I mean, like a Belichick, like, like a Phil Jackson. I mean, you could bring these guys together, you could galvanize them. And I think knowing that kind of Russia was on the brink, or sorry, excuse me, at the time, Soviet Union was on the brink with some degradation within their ranks and the country and economic issues and stuff like that. It was almost like a seized opportunity to say, these guys have had their time. They've had their time. They've dominated and they've dominated, and no one's pushed back until now. We're going to be the ones to push back. We're going to be the ones, to, as Mike Tyson always says, you know what I mean? No, everyone has a game plan until you punch them in the mouth. You know what I mean? And essentially, US punched them in the mouth, and they didn't know how to react. They didn't see it coming.
Yeah. Now, obviously, they had to get there first, and they had to upset. You mentioned the Czech team; they had to upset to get there, and they had to beat some teams they weren't supposed to beat to get there. So as much as
Tied Sweden, right? They almost
yeah,
lost to Sweden.
and so as much as we go, oh well, this team they won one game, they won more than that. They had to get there first, and that's something to be said about where you can't just say, oh, you can't just dismiss it as a coin flip. It's just luck. This is a team that found a way to beat the teams in front of them and teams that should have beat them to even get there. And really, and when they beat Russia, they weren't. That was the semifinal game. They had to go play another game still. They had to go win the gold medal game still, and that was a game they had to come from behind in as well.
Yeah, back to
The-
back come from behind wins. I mean,
yeah,
against two great teams.
yeah. No, this team, it was a special team, but there was, for honest, to beat those kind of teams, they had to be on a roll. They had to have some luck on their side. They had to have the leadership. They had to have the grit. But what would have happened? What would a loss have done for world peace and politics? I guess I put that to you right now. Like, if we lose that game, if we finish with the silver or the bronze, does that make a difference if we finish silver or bronze also? But like, what does that do? What does it do? What would that have done for the geopolitical scene at the time?
I mean, I think it would have been only a minor setback, for the United States. And I think it would have only been a minor victory for the USSR. I mean, the Soviets did end up, winning gold in 84 and 88 again,
Yep.
and still, they fell apart in 1991 and disbanded as as the USSR. But
And really,
I, I
if I saw what you said, they won 2 Olympics consecutively. Really, they won 3 after that. For to be honest, like, because the Soviet Union broke up, but all the players came together as a
came
united
together and won. Yeah,
and
again. I
won a
mean,
third year. So essentially, the Soviet Union players came back and won 3 additional Olympics in a row after losing this one in 1980.
yeah, so they were still dominating, but
Yeah.
it didn't change the aspects of of the Cold War, of the country. The country, like I said, at that point, I mean, Reagan in the United States had, like I said, adopted in his presidency a tough anti-communist policy abroad, and he issued the Reagan Doctrine and Reaganomics and tax cuts to get us out of the mass employment that was happening in the United States. It was around 9%, which was the highest at the time. America needed a rallying cry, and of course, the miracle might have on ice brought that. I mean, so would eventually there be another, miracle, another rallying cry? I think so. I mean,
Mhm.
Reagan was fighting communism on the political front, but the USSR was falling apart. I mean,
Yeah,
think about this though. If they don't win in 1980, like, my God, does that change the entire course of history? Are we doing the whole Marty McFly 1985 alternate timeline again? I mean, like we talked
yeah.
about before. I mean, does the Kirk Gibson, home run now, is it a fly out instead of that iconic home run off Eckersley? Does Pete Rose not gamble on baseball all of a sudden? Does Mary
Yeah.
Lou go down with an ACL tear in '84 and not win the gold? I mean,
And I
what
think
changes?
one of the big questions that we were faced with this right here was, would this be a world changing event? And I think we both kind of agree. No, it wasn't. Like, this was a flashpoint. It was a moment of national pride. It was the greatest upset maybe of all time. But did it really affect the world? I just don't see how it did,
I
because
don't either. I
because
think it might have
it
affected
didn't
Al Michaels.
it didn't even break the Soviet stranglehold on hockey. Like, it didn't even do that. So it didn't, and it didn't change really the Americans' fortunes going forward for quite some time. I just don't see what it on a large scale what it really did, except for it was a feel good story, and it was it was the birth of some careers for sure. But I think on a large scale, I just don't see what it would have done. I think ultimately, while we put a lot of importance on a game like this, it remained a game. It remained a game, and it was a game that we're happy to that the United States won, but it is nonetheless a game. It's not anything more than that.
Yeah, I mean, uh, as the Cold War does the Cold War rage on? No, no, no. I agree. It
Yeah.
doesn't.
It
I
would have
mean,
been
like I
more
said,
interesting. It would be more interesting if it had. Then we could have a story here. We can talk about how if this game hadn't gone this way, how we're flying a Soviet flag over the White House. Like that. That would be a more interesting story. But I don't see it. I don't see how this game really mattered that much. As much as some people might put an importance on this game. That's kind of what it was.
it,
It was
it might
king.
affect Al Michaels' career.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, his career exploded after he uttered those infamous words. Like when he said, "Do you believe in miracles?" Yes. I mean, he was interviewed and said that that was like the one time in his career where he,
So
showed he was an objective person. Like the 9-year-old boy in him took
so
over his emotions in the victory.
So I see where you're going with that, which sort of brings me to my one of my questions here for you. So whose legacy grew the most from this? If they lose, or really, I think we both agree Al Michaels' legacy is built here on the Miracle for Ice. So when you talk about if this Miracle on Ice doesn't happen, is Al Michaels, is his legacy tarnished the most out of this?
Might be. I mean, he might have been so depressed from the loss. He takes to the hooch, never ends up in the chair next to John Madden after Pat Summerall retires.
I mean, it
Like,
was that call where he got he won Sportscaster of the Year for his coverage of the Olympics that year, and it kind of was a launching pad for his career.
oh, put him.
That didn't. If this doesn't happen, maybe his career never gets launched to the where he's able to do all the stuff we know he's done, all the football, all the giant coverage of the Olympics, of professional sports. He's kind of been the face of
He was
broadcasting.
stamped on the map with that. I mean, skyrocketed his career, absolutely. I mean, it might affect Kurt Russell. You know what I mean? It might affect Steve Gutenberg. I mean, Russell played, Disney never makes the movie Miracle in 2004. Gutenberg never gets to play Jim Craig in Miracle on Ice in 81. I mean, so they're out of jobs, in those two
So
movies.
speaking of that, then, like, when we talk about someone whose legacy maybe tarnished the most, Herb Brooks, I think, is another one that we got to talk about, because Herb Brooks, I mean, he won his 3 national championships before the 1980s, but didn't go on to do a whole lot after this 1980s. I mean, not to say he didn't do a lot, he didn't succeed a lot.
No, and
Um,
then he died in a car accident, right? In
yeah,
like early 2000s, which is a shame.
You know, he was involved with the filming of the Miracle movie, and then never got to see it completed though.
That sucks. I mean, and look, I mean, if they don't win, no one's making the movie Almost a Miracle. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like the story, not only it's great because it galvanized a country and it, like I said, it had all American eyes and people around the world like witnessing something that just should have never happened. And probably if they play that game 9 times out of 10, the US takes an ass whooping. You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
it was that night in that game, and I mean, it's forever going to be etched in the hearts and minds of anyone who not only saw it, but like someone like me who I didn't, I was born in '82. I'm 37, and I wasn't alive for it, but I've seen the movies and I watched, good portions of the game. And I mean, growing up, my dad, my brother, yeah, Miracle on Ice, Miracle on Ice. I mean, like I would play floor hockey in high school. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd be like, yo, Miracle on Ice. Like, and it's crazy how much influence it had. But really, it's now, I think, in real aspects, in the true aspects of what it meant in an economic and international global level. I mean, it's really a great Hollywood story, but it didn't stop. It didn't stop Reagan from uttering those famous words at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Challenging Gorbachev to tear down the wall. It didn't. You know, it didn't stop the Cold War from ending. It didn't. Soviet Union didn't overcome the socioeconomic downfall with that win over the U.S.
Hmm. No,
So I mean,
and that's true. I think that
they didn't get their hand to God moment. You know what I
no,
mean?
it didn't change the way the future went. So I think if we look at this and go give this one to the Soviets, their dynasty was it was a speed bump for them, and you just take that speed bump out, it just continues along as it did after it. With like we said, with three more Olympics, I got them winning three World Juniors in the next 6 years after 1980, six World Championships in the next eight tournaments. Like nothing changed for them. So you add this win to them, their hockey team doesn't skip a beat because they didn't anyway.
God,
Um,
I
they,
love
they,
that
they,
hockey knowledge, brother.
they weren't broken up. The coach stayed on, and for the record, when we talk about what allowed this upset to happen, I mean there is a key moment in the game where their coach Tikhonov kind of probably cost them the game when he pulled Tretiak after the first period for two goals he gave up. The second one being a rebound he kicked out that he didn't play well. But when you have the best goalie in the world, would you pull him after the first period in a tie game?
No,
It made no sense.
absolutely not.
It
No,
made no
no. I
sense,
mean,
and it's looked back now as one of those moments. Talk about like terrible coaching decisions. It's up there with Pete Carroll throwing the ball at the goal line on the Super Bowl. It is that kind of a coaching blunder that probably
that's a
Tretiak.
perfect way to put it.
If Tretiak's in there, there's a good chance Team USA doesn't score two more goals in
He
the next two
Malcolm
periods.
Butlered himself,
He did.
Yeah, yeah. I don't get it. 2-2. I mean, it wasn't like they were getting shellacked. It
No,
wasn't 5-0. I get he gives up 3 or 4 goals in the first 7 minutes, and you're like, all right, this guy's not in it. Like we gotta, now we've got to go to a backup plan where we're scrambling. But no, you never take your best player out. I mean, well, he might not have been the best player overall, but the guy was a career. I mean, this
I
guy was the
mean,
Marty Brodeur of his time.
yeah, he was
Um,
considered the best goalie in the world.
in the world.
Obviously,
You don't
yeah.
pull him
So
2-2. No, you don't. I mean, it was a choke job like no other in that coaching aspect. I mean, he puckered. He
yeah,
puckered. He didn't expect it, and he puckered.
but even that didn't stop it. He kept his job. He kept his job until the Soviet Union dissolved. Like
Yeah.
he was never again. This was nothing more than a blip on the radar for them.
Yeah, I
And really,
agree.
we talk about what the U.S. did after it. The U.S. doesn't medal in the Olympics again until 2002 anyway, and that's with that win. If they don't have that win, I mean, I don't see any kind of like change in the way the U.S. engaged in the world scene in hockey. If that win, that was a moment that could have bolstered them and brought them into the elites, and it didn't. It just didn't. Like I think today we look at what our American hockey is, and it's come a long way. But the fact is, we still haven't won a gold medal since then. Um, they don't medal in world championships until we get a bronze in '96, and we still never got higher than a bronze. Really, the only meaningful win for the U.S. Came after that is the '96 World Cup, which is the successor to the Canada Cup, which of course USSR won that in previous years as well. So I just don't see where this game changed the paths of either one of these powers in hockey or in global politics. So I think when you look for what changed in the event here, when we go, okay, the Soviet Union won, I think we see like Herb Brooks, Al Michaels, their careers are changed, probably for the negative with the Soviet win here.
Maybe
But
some
who
of these guys don't go in the NHL from the
Yeah.
US,
I mean, yeah, I think you have your Neil Broughton, your Ken Morrow, Mike Ramsey, Dave Christian. Those guys probably are going to make it regardless. But you're right; those guys that step in and get a cup of coffee, which is awesome. That's a great story. I mean, you and me never played a lick of hockey in the NHL. If we had played one game, you'd never hear us shut up about it. We would
Oh my
never shut up about it. Like, so good for those guys. I mean, I don't want to say, oh, you only played 30 games. I mean, that guy's done. That's an amazing accomplishment to play professional sports at these highest levels. It's impressive, but I don't think they get the shot without that gold medal on their resume.
And you're
But when you
feeling it tonight. You're on fire. I love it.
well, when we
Use your hockey slang. Use your hockey slang. You're in the barn right now, and you're putting the biscuits in the basket, man. Like you are just tearing it up. I love it. I mean,
so I'm not. I mean, I love
well,
to hear that. But so whose legacy's inflated then by the Soviet win? Like because the Soviets, and I mean, nothing changed. Whose
no, because
legacy is
they're still considered the greatest. I don't
yeah.
know if anybody's legacy is inflated. I mean, look, if you want me to, I would tell you this. This I can't argue with you. We're on the same page. I don't see the Soviet Union not dismantling and having their downfall. Even if it's prolonged a little bit, I think it still happens. I think U.S. we'll find another moment one way or another. I mean, if you want me to look for shits and giggles, if you want me to have fun with this, I'll have fun. I want to have, I love the topic. I love the story. I love the Miracle on Ice. Like if you want to have fun with it, I mean, let's see how the game would have played out. You know what I mean? Had the Soviets won. I think the Soviets probably, they would have tied the game in the closing seconds. Remember that? Like, oh my God, it was like a little over a minute and they're skating around and they put a couple shots on net. And I know Craig kicked one away. And I mean, people are just like, in for terms of me, I know when watching one of my teams in a championship game and they got the lead, now I'm just puckering up. You know what I mean? My asshole is tight. I'm sitting there, I'm shaking, I'm nervous, I want to cry, I want to
That's
scream.
that's the
Yeah.
Philadelphia sports fan in you. Is that
Yeah,
that's what that
yeah,
is?
it is. It is. I wanna run through a wall at the same time. I don't want to hurt anyone around me, but I think I'm gonna start tossing things, you know what I mean, one way or another, in a good way or a bad way. But those closing
I'm
seconds.
gonna sidetrack you for a second because I remember the first time I ever met you was watching an Eagles game. In fact, it was at our producer Anthony's house, and he had a game on there. And I remember you flew in through the window. That's how I met you. He was on a first floor apartment with no shirt on, with your whole body painted green and silver for the Eagles, and we're screaming about them. You were cawing around the room, flapping your arms like wings. Uh, I know you care. Like
Yeah.
that's how I
I
met
wrote
you. I'm like,
I
who
wrote
is this dangerous lunatic? What's going on?
I wrote the letters T and O on my ass cheeks in 2004, and I had breakaway pants. Remember those like snap away pants, like wrestlers wear, and the different athletes were wearing at the time, like the Adidas. I had a pair of them, and I was fully prepared to run naked down my road with T.O. on my ass and Eagles win on my chest. Unfortunately, I never got that chance until many, many years later. But I didn't have T.O. on the time. But yeah, I get it. I'm definitely out there. I'm definitely a little nutty, but you know what? That feeling though goes for, in this case, you're watching, your national team. You're watching the red, white, and blue, and you're thinking, man, there's a minute left. And you know what happens? I mean, I think the Soviets end up doing what they always do. They tied a game in the closing seconds to go 4-4. I believe, and you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, because like I said, I'm gonna go to your hockey knowledge, that brain of yours. You know what I mean? I believe the medal rounds though had to end with a winner regardless, right? I know non-medal rounds they would just tie and it was a point system,
Correct,
but I think
correct.
medal rounds had to end with a winner. So I think Soviets would have scored early in extras to break the hearts of the Americans. This is what I think happens though. This pisses Reagan off to no end, right? Especially since Jimmy Carter like bitched down, boycotted the Summer Olympics that year in Moscow over the politics. So that leaves Reagan with no choice. You know what Reagan's going to do? He's going to make a deal with the devil, Alex. All right. Reagan's calling owner, chairman Ed Snyder in for the Olympic Committee in '84, right? Snyder's reuniting the entire Philadelphia Flyers bullies team like a bunch of renegade Rambo like mercenaries, right? Even if most of them are Canadian still, you're right. He's convincing
And
them,
professionals, and so they
yeah,
can't
and
play,
professionals. He's convincing them to play for the US, right? Assuming they all have dual citizenship by 1984, right?
which they
Which
don't.
they should. They should, though, you know. I mean, shit, if they're playing 76, I think it takes 7 years to get your citizenship, right? But Reagan doesn't care if the US even wins gold, just as long as the bullies beat the shit out of the Soviet pussies and humiliate them. I mean, he's basically like, let's humiliate these fucking Soviet pussies, Foley. Right? He's doing it. He's like, hey, Foley, I'm going to shove your face in some dough and make cookies. You know what I mean? Like, all right. So say Reagan's plan then fails and the USSR survives that alternate 1984, you know, a year later, America finds its replacement miracle. Okay. A propaganda film will be released that shows a 5'9", 200-pound Italian American tank that eats lightning and crabs thunder and is going to hit the Soviets with such a vicious left that Gorbachev is going to feel it like a lightning bolt hitting the tip of his penis. All right. That's right, Alex.
Is this
Rocky IV. Rocky IV. All right. America gets the miracle back 5 years later when Rocky montages his way to dropping that juice head Ivan Drago. We hit the lights. Hearts on Fire is blazing on every radio station. John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band are bigger than Bon Jovi, and everyone is screaming, Drago! From the rooftops of their homes across suburbia. You know what I mean?
I mean, sort of.
Listen, with those three little sentences, if I could change and you could change, everybody could change. Boom. Cue the credits. Flag boxing gloves exploding at the end. Gorbachev realizes the era of communism and immediately sides the INF Missile Treaty with Reagan 2 years earlier in '85 instead of '87. The Berlin Wall mysteriously disappears from existence. The USSR rallies to become Russia instead of separate city states. Lights go out. Crank up Survivors, Burning Heart, and set the summer of '85 on fire like a camp counselor's sexy time bunk. Boom. That's how I end it. That's how it goes. We get the miracle back. Al Michaels somehow calls the boxing match. It's all good, man.
I don't know if any of this is going to happen.
No, listen,
I'm going to do my best to get us back on the rails after
a
that.
boy could dream. All right. A boy could dream in an alternate universe. All right. Where we don't win in 1980.
All right. So we don't win in 1980. How does this affect U.S. development? How does this affect the development of U.S. hockey going forward?
Hurts it.
It hurts it. I agree. I think that's really the only place where we see a real big difference here. And obviously, we talked before about what the U.S. has done in the Olympics and World Championships and juniors. And for honest, it's been not a lot, but I think it would be less if we didn't have that win.
Yeah, I won't go as far as saying it's going to be like, you know, what Major League Soccer is in the United States compared to the European leagues, you know,
Yeah.
like,
I mean, but there's something to be said about that. Without that moment where that made everyone to pay attention to what hockey even was, because hockey got a lot of fans that day in the United States, and it led to future generations of kids playing that. And now we talk about stuff like we just mentioned earlier, the Canadian, the U.S. college system not being a real pipeline to the NHL, and that's not the case today. I mean, kids get drafted out of college all the time. That's a regular thing now.
Money making sports. Or, you know, for kids, you know, high school kids and middle school kids, you know what I mean, playing hockey. I mean, it's an expensive sport. You know what I mean? I don't want to call it a rich person sport, but it's not cheap. You know what I mean?
No, you have to be exposed to it early, obviously. So if you're in Canada, you still have a leg up because every kid there is exposed to it. But you're right. If you don't have the means and the ice time, you're right. It can be a tough sport to play. But but if not for moments like this that galvanized and made people aware of it, like I don't think we get a kid like Austin Matthews coming out of Arizona. Like that's not something that happens. We don't get these kids coming out of California or like Florida even. Like we have I know the Philadelphia Flyers team there. You got Shane Gostisbehere out of Florida. Like those guys, that doesn't happen. The kids continue to come out of Boston Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and that's it. Without moments like this, and without moments like the '96 World Cup, I think that is where we see the biggest difference. I think that they grow the game in the United States this way, and I
I
think we've
agree
seen a lot. I think
100%.
we've seen a lot of that improved. And look back in 1980, we had 21 teams in the NHL. We didn't get a 22nd team until 91, 92. So I think really when you look at that kind of stuff, the growth of the NHL, the growth of kids coming up, I think that it was the Miracle on Ice is a long-term win. It's a long-term win in that way, where we were able to develop and grow the game, and we're going to win more in the future because of a win like that in the past. And then
I,
none of this happens. I think we continue to be a doormat in hockey if we don't have that 1980, because that 1980 set up the '96 World Cup, and those are really the two big pivotal moments in hockey in the United States.
yeah, nationally speaking, yes, we absolutely falter. I mean, I don't know if how much it'll hurt. I mean, I think it improved and increased the viewership and fanaticism around the NHL and helped develop a lot of teams, a lot of American teams in American cities in the NHL. I don't know if the NHL. I don't know. I mean, it could have dropped it a lower level. I mean, you think of hockey, you think of the NHL. It's one of the four majors in this country. Besides
Mhm.
NFL, MLB, and NBA. I
If you
mean,
ask me,
could have.
if you ask me, Reno, it's number one though.
I know. In your heart and in your mind, yes, absolutely. And I don't, and you know what? I will say this, man. The American hockey fan is a dedicated fan through and through. I mean, they they bleed the sport, and you might not see 60,000 or 70,000, person stadiums other
Well,
than like,
well, well, Winter Classics.
well, that's what I was gonna say. Other than the Winter Classics, other than special games, I mean, you might only see like 20 to 24,000 attendance in certain stadiums. I mean, it is a rabid, diehard fan base. I mean, they hockey is life for a lot of people. And it's a shame it doesn't get spoken about more and broadcasted more and made more of a big, deal. But, maybe you blame that on Batman, you blame that on how it's marketed, advertised to the person. But you're right. I mean, the 80 win helps not only NHL, it helps colleges, it helps develop, American players. And again, they're not on the level of like an American soccer player, you know what I mean? Like who has to go over to Europe to really develop and get into like, the Barclays Premier League or, La Liga or any of those. I mean, essentially the NHL is still the biggest portion of the sport for hockey, and it's out of the United States with Canadian teams. You know what I mean? But it's not
Yeah.
like a majority of the teams are Canadian teams, and we only have one or two Northern American teams in there. A majority of the teams are American teams.
However,
Um,
to be fair, the NHL was considered the Premier League prior to the 1980 Olympics, and when the Soviets were coming over, that was the first real question of whether it was or wasn't the Premier League, was
yeah,
whether these continental leagues in the Soviet Union were indeed the superior leagues. And I think now, post Soviet the dissolving of the Soviet Union, we see all the players coming over here. We see leagues, over in Russia and Sweden and all these other European leagues. And I think now we all know now that the NHL is the best league, but it's because the NHL pulls from the world now too, where we have. I remember the Flyers talked about them earlier. They didn't draft a Russian player once when the walls came tumbling down. All the other teams started taking the Russian players, and they held to their guns for a while. Didn't help win any Stanley Cups, that's for sure. So
yeah.
now you can see every team knows you gotta pick from the world, man. The world is it's a big place, and there's hockey players that are good everywhere, including the United States and including Russia.
It's a
And
must.
yeah, it's a must. You have to look into all these places now, and
Wish
that's the growth of the game, and it doesn't happen here without 1980. So
completely agreed. Completely agreed.
so I guess the question to you is when I think about the Miracle on Ice, what comes to your mind? What's the one moment? Is it the call? Is it something else? Is it the movie?
I think it's the call. I think it's the idea that the David versus Goliath, that true historical, representation of David versus Goliath in sports, where a team filled with, unknown, young, unknown players that aren't household names, that aren't NHL players, that no one's even heard of, are going up against, some of the most talented, skilled, dominant players on the planet. And they shouldn't even stood a chance. They should have been wiped off the ice. The game should have been over after the first. And what they did is they stuck through, and they believed in each other, and they pulled off an upset. And who doesn't love the underdog story? I mean, I don't
No,
know if you don't love the underdog story, go fuck yourself. You're not a human being. I mean,
I
if you don't
mean,
chew Big Red, fuck you.
I'm pretty sure you went on a 20-minute spiel about Rocky in there, so we know you love the underdog story.
I love the underdog story. I'm still pissed that Rocky didn't win the first one.
Um, so
But they needed it to.
I'm with you. When I think of what's the moment, what's the thing I remember? It's the Al Michaels call. It's arguably the greatest call in sports history, and it's I mean, it's a classic. It's a classic. So
Yeah,
I guess that's how we wrap it up today, right? So let's hit them with the plugs there, Reno.
Yeah. First and foremost, do some thank yous and shout outs. We'd like to thank Lantern Light Studios for allowing us to do this podcast. Without their support, none of this would be possible. We'd also like to thank Anthony Zacola for producing the show and for other show contributions, both on and off air. We'd like to thank our audio engineer, Maria Lubanovic, for working her magic and making Alex and I sound podcast professional. Where you could reach Alex and I, or Alex and me, you could visit us at our website, ggnppodcast.com, for show news and notes. You could also follow the show on Twitter at GGNP Podcast, or you could follow Alex and I on Twitter at AlexFitz44 and at the Kid Reno, kid spelled with 2 D's. Or you can follow me on Instagram as well. Same name, the Kid Reno, kid spelled with 2 D's. Please hit both of us up and let us know what you think of our show. Let us know what we could do better, or let us know of any sports moments you'd like us to revisit. You could also visit lanternlightstudios.com for more information about our show and their other amazing podcasts, Game Johns and Screen Johns. We love these shows and highly recommend you check them out if you haven't already. If you like our podcast and have enjoyed this episode, we kindly ask you to give us a 5-star rating and leave a good review, as it will go a long way for us to grow and improve the show for all our listeners. So thank you all for tuning in. And that's all I have, Alex.
That's a hell of a read there, Reno. I like it. So we'll go out on that. This has been one of the greatest games never played. Take it away, Al Michaels.
Do you believe in miracles? Yes.
All right. That's all we got.
Morrow, up to Schultz, 5 seconds